You are listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are chatting with music director of the Wichita Symphony and the Binghamton Philharmonic, Daniel Hege. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Erica.
Tell us what it's been like trying to program your 2020 seasons this year. What new things are you trying out thanks to COVID?
Well, I've reimagined the season in Wichita probably 3 to 4 times already. And I basically have stopped in the second iteration from January of 21 through the rest of the season and have only reprogrammed several times the first concerts that are going to be happening this fall. And because of the racial tension that's been happening over the summer, in addition to having COVID, many people have talked about this as being twin pandemics, problems in society. And so instead of seeing the COVID epidemic as an obstacle for people to getting together, we've used as an opportunity to reprogram and bring in more BIPOC composers, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and female composers, basically underrepresented composers, and bring them into the programming along with small orchestras so that we can be socially distanced on the stage and also performing so that we have just the strings on the stage at one time and then woodwinds and brass at a different time, and they can space out even more on the stage. So yes, I've programmed several different times, but it's interesting when you're presented with what appear to be obstacles at first, you can turn them into opportunities.
Absolutely. And when you have the opportunity to use smaller ensembles where normally probably you feel like you should be using the whole ensemble, there's different works for that. So is there anything that you're really looking forward to doing that you wouldn't normally do because it's a smaller work?
It's funny. Oftentimes I want to program something just for strings. But when we have the whole orchestra there, I feel like I'm leaving them out. I feel like I'm leaving out woodwinds, brass, percussion. And so the tendency is to always program for large orchestra. That seems to be what the ticket buying public want. And also we have the large stage and we have a lot of musicians we want to employ. And also the repertoire is so colorful when we employ all of the different instruments. So it is a bit of a treat to do some wind serenades, to do some string serenades, to do some brass choir pieces and things like that, things that wouldn't normally happen on a season because we're trying to utilize every musician at all times. So yeah, it has afforded me some opportunities to conduct some of the stuff I don't normally do. On the first concert in Wichita, for example, we're doing Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings, which is not anything terribly revolutionary there. But we also have a new piece by George S. Clinton, who is a film composer who wrote a piece for us called Prairie Reminiscence, which is a very lovely piece just for strings. And we're also doing a piece by Wang Ji, Five Faces of Joy, for just strings. Cool. And so it's interesting. We can get two contemporary composers on, one Asian American female, and so that's one way that we can do this. And I'm looking forward to this. I mean, the piece by George Clinton is a premiere, and it's in some ways more daring programming than normal. It's easy, I think, for us to default to something that feels very safe when we're really concerned with getting people into the hall or at least watching virtual through streaming. We want to do something safe, like the tried and true old repertoire.
Right.
But I'm not convinced that that's always the right way. I don't think that people are simply interested in just the old, contrary to what we might hear from some people who may be more outspoken about what they like. We might hear the people who want to be more vocal about what they like, but we're not hearing from everybody. And it's interesting because I've been playing actually a lot more contemporary music than normal last season, and we were having a lot of positive feedback about it. I think part of that has to do with really choosing the right kind of music, that it's going to resonate and be relatable to people the very first time they hear it, which is really a bit of evolution that I've had to go through from being a young conductor when I wanted to program uh, pieces by contemporary composers that were very difficult, I think, difficult
Yeah.
listening,
Yeah.
especially for a non-musician in the audience. Um, they just wouldn't relate to it. And
Mhm.
my feeling was, well, if you listen to it several more times, you might get it. But I think that that's just not a realistic expectation for
Yep.
people.
Yep.
Number one, because if someone had a less than pleasant experience with something, it's not likely that they're going to run out and say, "Hey, I didn't like it so much. Why don't I do it again?"
Yeah. 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, it's just not likely to happen.
Yeah.
And yet we all know from our own experience that maybe the first time we've heard certain works, we didn't like them very much, or they didn't really do anything for us. But on repeated hearings, it got under our skin in a very good way.
Hmm.
And we were very pleased with it, and it became more gratifying. So there are two sides to it. I mean, um, I can see the value in playing something that maybe people wouldn't get the very first time, but with repeated hearings they would, which means that you could program it again later in the year or in a successive season if you really believe in that work.
Right.
The other way, though, is to what I've decided to do is to play a piece that I think will be relatable the very first time so that people can get conditioned to looking at an unfamiliar name and having a pleasant experience.
Yes.
Because if that is triggered, then it's more likely the next time they look at an unfamiliar name on the program, they'll say, hey, this might be interesting. So I'm relying on people's curiosity and just the excitement from the stage. If I can bring a composer in to speak to the audience too, then people realize there's a real human being there.
Yes.
And that also makes a bit more of a connection, and they feel proud that this composer has written this piece and the orchestra is going to play it. Try to key into those aspects of the psychology for the audience.
Absolutely. It's basically redefining what the word contemporary means so that
Yeah.
people don't see it and go, oh, Stockhausen, something I don't
Yes.
understand, and go, contemporary can be beautiful. It can be challenging. It can be fast. It can be slow. It can be ugly. It can be serene. It can be
Hmm.
anything. And maybe you'll like it. So I love that idea. I think so many people are terrified when they see a composer's name that they don't know. And they're like, oh, here we go.
I think that, you know, I don't want to put this at the feet of the music critics, but, through the 50s, the 60s, and so on like that, during that time, it became very vogue to write this very outlandish kind of music.
Hmm.
And a lot of times music critics would say, well, the audience loved it, so it probably wasn't that good. And it
Right.
and if they hated it, then that was kind of in the realm of the academics, and that means that it was over their head.
Right.
Therefore, it was a really good piece of music. The audience
Right.
just didn't get it.
Right.
And I think when you were able to fill concert halls more at that time, then they could say those kinds of things and sound very erudite and
Hmm.
keep classical music, even classical contemporary music, in kind of this ivory tower. And I
Right.
don't think it really did any favors for later on, because I think it did alienate a lot of the public, and they
Hmm.
they started to think contemporary bad.
Right.
And what they need to realize is that during Beethoven's time, that was contemporary music, the music that they
Right.
loved today, and that there were people back then that were hearing a premiere of a Beethoven work who thought it was pretty bracing and out there. And over time, it became, of course, considered great, great music.
Can you tell us a little bit about your early musical experiences and things that really shaped your love of music?
Sure. Um, Early on, even when I was a kid going to church in the Mennonite church, which my dad was a Mennonite and my mom was Catholic actually, but she became Mennonite later. We went to church regularly, and it was there that I heard four-part harmony on a regular basis. And everybody sang four-part harmony, and everyone could read music, and we would sing new hymns and things like that. So music was a very big part of my experience, even from a very young age, just hearing it. And I think that helped inform me a lot about harmony. And I remember even as a kid thinking, wow, that chord is really interesting, and how it goes there, and just the unexpected places it would go. So I remember already thinking about it at a young age. And I couldn't sing bass back then, but I loved the bass line. And I was just waiting for my voice to change. And I was hoping that I could be a bass, because even when your voice changes, you might still be a tenor. But I just enjoyed that so much. So the church singing was very important. And the Mennonite church really had very, very solid ability to do that. And even on these, these massive conferences they would have in Canada or in the United States, when there were like 1,500 people singing, they would all be singing a cappella and in four parts. It was just astonishing. So that was a good tradition to come from. And my very first instrumental experience was playing the baritone horn when I was in the fourth grade, like first day of fourth grade. I remember we were given a list of instruments to choose from, and my dad liked that sound. And it's a relatively easy instrument to just get going on. Right away with the baritone horn, I enjoyed that a lot. And then we moved to Idaho when I was about 9 years old. And my grandmother had a piano in her basement, and my parents thought it would be good for me to start piano. And I did. I started playing piano. I'm not a pianist today, but it is the instrument that I use on a daily basis. I play every single day. I study every day music, and so it's my vehicle for learning scores. So anyway, those are some of my young experiences, and I think I would be remiss to not mention that both my mother and my father were extremely supportive of my love for music at a young age, and they nurtured me along the way and always gave me encouragement, never any discouragement, even when they probably knew that it would be difficult to have a profession in music.
Right.
But they didn't really talk about that. They didn't really talk about the profession of music as so much. They were interested in my education, and they were interested in just supporting me and building me up. And they gave me confidence. And that is what is so critical when you're young. And when you see that someone has such an incredible love and devotion to it, you want to feed into that because it's a healthy outlet.
Can you think of a concert that you heard maybe as you were younger and kind of falling in love with music that you left that concert saying, yes, that was it. This is my thing.
Yeah. When I was really young, I can't remember that as much. I listened mostly to LPs and things like that. And I had a wide variety of music that I listened to. I mean, from the rock music that my friends were listening to and some jazz that my mom liked listening to. We had a lot of classical LPs at home as well. A lot of people LPs have made a comeback. So I think people do know what they are. And so I was mostly listening through that kind of thing. And my first experience listening to classical music and having a kind of an epiphany for wanting to go into music happened when I listened to Glenn Gould playing the Goldberg variations of Bach when I was 9 years old.
Was this the 1950s version?
Yes, it was the famous 1955 recording on CBS recording at the CBS recording studio. And Glenn Gould was about 22 years old then, and that he became basically an overnight success. And of course, toured all over the place. Was one of the greatest pianists, especially an exponent of Bach's music, and not only as a player but as a lecturer. I mean, he's an astonishing intellect. But when I discovered that LP, I remember thinking, even as a 9-year-old, I thought the cover of it looked rather pretentious because it had Glenn Gould looking so artsy, and his hair was all fluffy and all over the place, and his shirt was not buttoned correctly, and one collar was up and one was down and half untucked, and he was gesticulating around. I said, this just can't be good, because he just looked like such a poser on this. Yeah. And I thought, no way. So even as a 9-year-old, I was very skeptical, and I put that record on and started to listen to it, and I mean, in about 2 seconds, I was just under a spell. And the Goldberg variations turned out to be a great choice for me to have an epiphany, because the whole piece, the way Gould played it without repeats and quite fast, was about 30 minutes, which for a 9-year-old is pretty good, for having an attention span like that. And of course, I had variations. So you had 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then you're on to the next one. And I was spellbound. In fact, it was a recording that I went back to over and over again. And I have to say that because it transported me into a new orbit of existence, I think that that really was the piece and the performance. It was Bach's music played by Glenn Gould that made me say, music will be my ruling passion. I mean, I don't think I actually thought that when I was 9, but as I look back on it, I see that that was a critical moment where I said, if music can do this for me, I have to give my life to it somehow. And I didn't know how. I mean, I was taking piano lessons, but it wasn't like I wasn't going to be a pianist. I didn't know how it was going to happen. It's almost like this beacon appeared way out there, and I wasn't sure how I was going to get there, but I was going to keep it there in front of me somehow, and I was going to zigzag on every path in order to get to it. So that was really my first experience. I can remember a palpably exciting time when I was listening to, actually, it was Beethoven's Seventh Symphony that I heard live with St. Martin the Field Orchestra, Academy of St. Martin the Fields with Neville Mariner. They were on tour through, they were coming through all the states, I think, in the West. And I was going to the University of Utah as a grad student in conducting. And I went to that concert. I'd been to many concerts before, but I remember this feeling of sitting there and hearing that beautiful second movement. And then the last movement, the players were almost getting off of their seats, the string player, the principals, and they were leaning in, and it was just overwhelming. And I remember just panting at the end, just listening to it and watching it. Mm-hmm. So that I remember, I can remember it because it was one of my earlier times where I was just enthralled by the music, and music that I was pretty familiar with by then. But I had not heard it like that, and that was something incredibly exciting. But I've heard so many concerts like that since, but that was one, I'd say, on the earlier side of my career.
And I feel like those are the first ones that stick as some sort of basis for the whole foundation for the love. Mm-hmm. I have two thoughts. One is, so after listening probably millions of times to that first recording of the Goldberg Variations, when the 1980s version came out at half tempo, what did that do to you? Did you love it also, or did it feel jarring being so ingrained with the original tempos?
Wow, what a great question. I relished getting to hear that, and I remember getting that recording and being excited to hear it. And it was jarring. And I found that I had a lot of respect for it because I had read so much about Glenn Gould. I became kind of a cultish guy about Glenn Gould in general, not just his recordings, but his interviews and his recordings and things like that. And I bought a biography that I watched on Kultur video and everything. So I had really high expectations of this second iteration of the Goldberg Variation. So at the beginning of his career and toward the end of his life. And I have to say, I didn't like it as much. Yeah. And like you say, the tempos were very different. I felt like he was more self-conscious in that one. I felt like he was really trying to outline the ground bass, and he was really trying to show the harmonic connection from one to the next, which is nice. I mean, you like to hear that, but I felt like when he played it the first time, when he was 22, there was a simplicity, just a kind of love for the music, and you still could hear that he understood the music so well, but it just came off, in my opinion, so musically. And I feel like when he came back to it later, he was kind of underlining things a little bit more, like to really show you this is how it's all connected. And like I said several times, he had such a formidable intellect. He really, really got that music, but I felt like it was just too much that he was trying to point it out. And I gravitate toward his first recording.
And I feel like we'll talk about that later as far as studying scores and conducting, but I feel like once you really embody what you believe something is to sound like, and then you hear something that's kind of the opposite of that, it's so challenging to wrap your head around this new ideal. And I feel like that piece, particularly when you've heard that first version so many times, that's the piece. That's how it is. And it's so full of life.
It is. And yet there's a part of me that really wants to believe that in our most mature selves, we can listen to different interpretations of something and still be very open to it, and not just think that the first way we heard it has to be the best all the time.
Absolutely.
So, but I did feel like I really gave it a good chance. And I think that actually speaks to this other idea, when we talk about interpretation over the years, because some people will just naturally say, well, this is in the later years, so it's better because this person who's performing this, they mature, they understand it better. Mahler conducted by an older conductor is better than a younger conductor because they get it. They've lived life a little bit more. They understand the depth of the score and the meaning. And I think that's a very worthy argument. I would never just throw that out at all. But I look at this Glenn Gould recording as proof to me that that's not necessarily always the case. I can say with Leonard Bernstein too. I've listened to some of the things he recorded later in his life, and I like the things that he recorded earlier because it just had this kind of spontaneity, obviously a very deep knowledge of the music, but somehow it had this spark to it that I felt like in later years, I didn't feel it as much. And I went to it with a very open mind of saying, well, now he's recording this, 20 years later, 30 years later, it's got to be so much better.
Yeah.
And I didn't always feel that way. So I think it's just not always the case. You can't necessarily say that later is better.
I just wanted to tell you, since we're on that topic, before we move on, that a concert that you conducted was my big moment of I'm going to be a musician no matter what. No matter what happens. You were an assistant in Baltimore,
yes.
And we got to audition to play with the Baltimore Symphony for one big concert each year. And the first performance that I did with that group and that experience, I left being like, definitely this is it. No matter what, I will never stop. So thank you, because you made a fantastic experience. The repertoire was incredible and the experience was incredible and all the musicians were amazing and it was so powerful. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for
started my career.
Thank you so much for saying that and passing that on. That's really heartening. And thank you very much.
It really is fun. And you never know when you're experiencing something with someone, what it's meaning to them. But it's really fun when you get a chance to revisit that experience and go, yeah, that was absolutely the beginning. And so lucky to have those opportunities for students who really think they want to do it and then they get to, and it's so affirming that you're immediately like, oh, absolutely. This is the best thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. I think those side-by-side concerts are so important. I mean, I've thought about that many times, how a younger person considering music maybe or not, but sitting next to a professional and playing great music, you're watching and listening to how they breathe, how they move, how they listen. And I think that can have just an indelible
and it was the real thing. I mean, the repertoire that was selected was incredibly hard.
Yes.
I'll never forget it. And we had, rehearsal that morning and the concert that afternoon. So the whole experience of having to be squished and done in one day, I'll never forget it. So thank you. And it's so much fun. Absolutely. So I would love to talk about how you got into conducting. Mm-hmm. What was the transition point for you?
Right. So by the time I got to college at Bethel College, in North Newton, Kansas. It's a 4-year liberal arts college. I was studying oboe and voice, and I was playing. I played in the jazz band too. I played bass trombone in the jazz band, and that's just because I felt like as a musician I should really try to understand these styles by actually playing them. And it was my junior year in college where I was a member of the concert choir, which we did almost everything a cappella. And the choral conductor tapped me on the shoulder and said, I'm going to be out this Thursday. And we rehearsed every day for 1 hour. And he said, I need you to lead the rehearsal. And I was like, why me? I really didn't know, but, and I really didn't know how to prepare. I didn't, I mean, I had taken basic conducting class, I think earlier, the first semester of that year, but I was a little nervous about it. It was a Brahms motet, and we were rehearsing it a cappella. And I remember I just got up in front of the choir and we went through a few warm ups and I started to conduct. And right away, I had ideas about what I wanted to do with it. And I realized that I've been sitting in rehearsal, I've been hearing everyone's part over and over again and knew how it fit together. So I started to rehearse it. And I think by the end of that rehearsal, the light bulb went on above. And I said, this enterprise of conducting and leading rehearsal and taking the score apart and coaching felt like it was very much a part of my personality, my natural personality. And I felt like this is where I feel most at home. And it had only been that one rehearsal. And so really what it did was made me very interested in learning more about it. It didn't make me say, I have to be a conductor now. It made me more interested in, I need to know more about this. I really, and I liked the idea of being analytical with scores and getting up, at 10,000 feet above it and 30,000 feet above and really seeing how the whole thing fits together. I liked the schematic idea of a score and seeing what makes it tick. Like, why does that chord make more sense for this emotional trigger, or what is it that makes this piece work, and how can I get the most out of the players? So it was the human connection of working with people, and it was kind of digging into the score and crawling into the mind of a greater human being's mind, like Brahms or Bach or Beethoven or a number of contemporary composers. So I just needed to know more about it. But even though my experience, my epiphany for conducting, which is when that happened, was in a choral setting, I really thought it would be better for me to go instrumental because I'd been playing in the orchestra also. And I just thought that the technical skills that I would need, I would be better served if I learned the orchestral side very well. And I felt like I had a lot of choral background. So I felt like for choral and orchestral works, I would be well suited for that. So anyway, I decided to go into a graduate program in orchestral conducting. And yeah, that's when it happened, my junior year, about halfway through. And so I started to apply during the following summer before my senior year. And I just applied to a couple different places, University of Colorado and also University of Utah. And why those schools? Well, I really just wanted to learn more about it. Again, I wasn't looking at graduate school as a jumping off point to become some great professional orchestra conductor. That just wasn't my goal. My goal was just to learn more. And I knew that if I went to a school where I would have experience conducting, that's what I needed. I needed experience conducting a good group. And I thought a collegiate level orchestra where I could be an assistant conductor, obviously not the professor, but as a grad student, I would get to conduct and I would get to listen in, and I could form my own chamber orchestra. And I did those things at the University of Utah. So I chose, and also University of Utah was 200 miles south of where my parents lived. And I'd been out in Kansas and I wanted to be a little bit closer to them. So I went out west, and the University of Utah, over 3 years, getting my master's degree in orchestral conducting, provided me with the experiences that I was looking for. It gave me, like I said, it gave me twice a week with my chamber orchestra that I formed, and plenty of time conducting the symphony orchestra. The conductor there, Madeline Schatz, was very generous in giving over rehearsal time and let me prepare works for concerts and things like that. So it really was the right thing for me. And I really loved my advanced theory teachers, professors as well, which really helped me go through a score to understand large structures and very in very fine detail about the harmonies and how everything worked together, which is really what I think you need as a conductor. So that was really kind of quenching my curiosity. And as I look back, it really prepared me well for the next jumping off point, which was when I got my first job in Los Angeles. It was right after I graduated with my graduate degree in orchestral conducting.
So how did that come to be? Because I feel like that's the hardest step. Is the
It
first
is.
one.
And I have to say, it was a lot of, I want to say it's a lot of luck. And I think we all benefit from some luck. But I also was reminded of an adage that luck tends to favor the prepared.
Absolutely.
So, yes, you can be super prepared and still not have your breakthrough. But if you are super prepared, it does increase the odds that you will be successful with something. Here I was in my third year, and of course it's a 2-year degree, but because the first year I had a graduate assistantship in a music library. And so then when I was my second year of grad school, I got the assistant conductor position because someone was already in the position before I got there. So I still had 2 years to use of my assistantship with the orchestra. So I started to spread my courses out over 3 years, which was great because it gave me more time to study and to get more in depth. And I feel like, especially as a conductor, you just need more time for all the things you're learning to kind of incubate a little bit more and to be, you just need it to, you need to be in the hinterlands. There's not a big rush to get out there because there's a lot to learn. So here I was in the third year. It was almost into the spring. And I thought, you know what? I'm not certified to teach music. From undergraduate, I had a history major and a music major, but I wasn't certified. You know, it's like, oh, great, history and music. What am I going to do? So, and then I have an orchestral master's, you know, conducting, and I can't, how am I going to use that? Like, I don't have enough to go teach at a college. I don't have a DMA or a PhD. I'm kind of stuck. And I started looking at ways that I could teach, you know, continuing ed at the University of Utah the next year or something. And right around that time, a flyer came in the mail from the Young Musicians Foundation debut orchestra. And the flyer was advertising a conductor position, music director of the debut orchestra. And it was a national conducting, it really wasn't a conducting competition, but it turned out to be that because you had to audition to win the spot. And I had to submit, you know, videos and resume and all that stuff that you have to do. And I thought, you know, my pedigree, my educational pedigree as a musician is not as flashy as a lot of other conductors who would be applying. You know, I didn't grow up in New York City and, you know, go to Juilliard pre-college and all that stuff. So I thought, I'm not going to have any chance. So when I got notified that I was one of the top 8 and that I could be invited for a live audition, it was so exciting because, I mean, it was so exciting that I almost didn't go because I thought, if I got this far, if I'm one of the top 8, I feel I'm really happy with that. But of course I went. And then I thought, I probably am not going to have much of a chance, but boy, did I study my scores. It was, you know, Stravinsky's Soldier Tale, Copland Appalachian Spring, and Beethoven First Symphony. So they could see a variety of styles and mixed meter and things like that. And I remember practicing and studying so much for that. I was as prepared as I think I could have possibly been. And at the end of the day, they just simply came over and told me I'm the one.
Wow.
I just couldn't believe it. And so I started making plans to move to Los Angeles. So I graduated in June of 1990 from the University of Utah, and I started my first rehearsals in September of the same year. So and in the summertime, I went over to Germany for a immersive program in German for a couple of months, which had already been planned several months before. And then I came back from Germany and went straight to LA, and that's where things began for me. That's really where I got my foot in the door, and it was so exciting because I was working with the orchestra was comprised of basically pre-professional musicians. So the very best players from ages 18 to 26. It was kind of an age limit there. And we auditioned every year. and a lot of them were, grad school at USC or Cal State Northridge or UCLA or other universities around. And it was a fantastic group. And we rehearsed and prepared concerts in the same way that professional orchestras do. You get 4 rehearsals, 2.5 hours each. It was not a union orchestra, but we observed standard union protocols. And then we did one concert, and we did in various places in Los Angeles. And I had that position for 3 years. And so that was my first step into the professional conducting world, because it was really conducted, the program was conducted like a professional enterprise. And after my first year in Los Angeles, 1990, 1991, starting in 1991, I became the assistant conductor of the Pacific Symphony, which was down in Irvine. Carl St. Clair was the music director, is still the music director there. And he hired me as his assistant to the orchestra. And so I was conducting a fair amount with them. I was doing probably 25 concerts a year, in education concerts, first half pops concerts, family concerts, ticketed concerts, and then some run out concerts. So I was doing a lot with Pacific Symphony for 2 years, and then with debut for 3 years. So right away, I was just ensconced in preparing scores. I'll add one more thing that was kind of interesting. After my first year at the debut orchestra, I thought, this is a great thing, but I do have a little extra time. And Pacific Symphony had contacted me and asked me if I would audition for the position of assistant conductor. I did. I didn't hear anything from them for about a month. I thought, what's going on? I haven't heard anything back yet. So I decided to apply for a different job, which was director of instrumental music at the Orange County High School of the Arts. And it was a magnet school. At that time, it was connected to Los Alamitos High School. And I would be in charge of conducting the orchestra, the chamber orchestra, running the jazz program. I didn't have to conduct the jazz program, but I would hire teachers for it. We had music history, music theory, and I was the administrator for all that. And I auditioned with several other conductors for that post, and I won that one. So I had debut orchestra, and I had the Orange County High School of the Arts. And then, and I'd already auditioned for Pacific, and then they called me after I took this other position. And I went, oh no, the timing is not great. I just don't know. I don't know if I can do 3 jobs. If I had only known about Pacific Symphony, if they had gotten back to me earlier, then I probably would not have taken the Orange County High School of the Arts job. But I had already signed a contract with Orange County High School of the Arts, and I had debut for another 2 years. And now Pacific Symphony, which is an actual professional orchestra, asking me to conduct. I remember they called me back and said, now don't think that the lapse of time means that we're not interested. I thought, well, kind of seems like it. But now that you are interested, I had to say yes. And that's one thing I think a lot of young people are told. And I think for the most part, it's pretty spot on advice. When you get opportunities, just believe in yourself. And if you're offered an opportunity, just do it. Because if you say no, then you're out anyway. You're not going to have that experience anyway. So why not say yes? And if it's not all that you had hoped it would be, you learn a lot and you're going to be better and sharper for the next thing. So I took 3 jobs, and somehow my whole schedule was just completely packed, and I was able to make it from one thing to the next. During this whole time, I was studying with Dan Lewis, who was well, he passed away recently, but he was really one of the most well-respected conducting pedagogues in the country. Along with Otto Werner Mueller, who was at Curtis, and he'd been at Juilliard and Yale before that, and Gustav Meyer, who was at University of Michigan, and Dan Lewis. That was, for a lot of people, those were the big 3. So I was really excited to get to study with Dan Lewis. That was part of the scholarship that was offered to me from the debut orchestra. When I won that position, a $5,000 grant came with it to study with the conductor of my choice. So I chose Dan Lewis and was able to connect through the University of California.
What was your favorite thing about spending time with him? There was something about his conducting or the way that he interacted with the score? What really grabbed you?
So I would have these weekly lessons with him, but the lessons themselves were not me conducting. It was the two of us going through scores together. And we would talk about what scores we were going to do next time. And oftentimes they were the scores that I was about to conduct with the debut orchestra or with Pacific Symphony, because I was green as could be. I mean, I just got out of grad school. And all of a sudden I had I had 1 year with debut, and then I had two other jobs. And I was just kind of, I wouldn't say I was drowning in scores, but I had so many scores to learn. And so I wanted help from him. I wanted him to show me what things I had to be careful about, and just kind of highlight things.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I came to his lessons very prepared. I'd already studied the score, and I was ready to ask him. And he said, this is always a problem here. The dynamics are not right for what's going to speak. He really helped me to think about that. And one of the best pieces of advice he gave me, this is before I was going to conduct the Pacific Symphony for my audition, and it was Beethoven 7 was on that, I remember. He said, go into that audition expecting the Pacific Symphony to sound like the Berlin Philharmonic in concert. And if you do that, you'll hear everything. That was the best advice he could have given me, because as young conductors, when we stand in front of an orchestra, we want to be concerned that we're as helpful as possible, that we really know the score, we're going to hear everything exactly right, and we can diagnose everything. And so when we think about it that way, we often think, oh, maybe they won't get this right, or maybe this won't be together, or maybe this will be out of tune, or maybe that, we're thinking about all the things that could go wrong. And not only is that kind of the defensive way of conducting, you're not really there as just a cop or a referee. You're there to inspire and to lead and to show them, be proactive about it, not just kind of like, okay, I'm going to sit back and listen to you. Yes, you need to listen. You need to listen like crazy, but you also need to be giving so much at the same time. And instead of thinking of the negative things that could happen, why not think about it being just great? And that sage advice meant that my picture of how it should sound, immediately I could spot the things that weren't exactly like that. So that was the best advice he ever gave me. He gave me just tons of great advice about scores and how to rehearse and how to think about things. But the other thing that he did, part of my scholarship, was that and this is his choice. He gave this to me. It was not a requirement of him. But when I was conducting the debut orchestra rehearsals, this is like a professional setup. The orchestra is sitting there. It's not like school, It was like a professional orchestra. And I was rehearsing Nielsen symphonies, Dvorak, Beethoven, Stravinsky Symphony in C, I remember. And he came in and sat in the very back, never stopped me like it would be for lab orchestra. Lab orchestra is very different, because you have several conductors come up, and the conducting teacher stops you and says, no, fix this and do it this way, and which is also very helpful. But he wanted me to be the man in charge, the person in charge of that group. And so he never stopped me. He just took notes. And then when I came to see him privately in his studio, he'd say, okay, you need to learn this part of the score a little bit better. I think you spent too much time on this. They will get that. You should have spent more time on this. And I was like, wow, okay. So he was very, very helpful, but he did it in a very discreet and nurturing way, when we were away from everybody else, which was really, really nice of him. And then we would watch the videos of me conducting the concerts together, and he would have a lot to say. So he was really great with that. But I have to say that the way I learned maybe the most from him overall was for me to attend his rehearsals. When he was rehearsing the USC orchestra, because they sounded fantastic. I mean, they were really a great orchestra and could sound very, very professional. But the way he would go in with the minutest detail and get in there, and the way he required so much musical discipline from the group, that was so very eye-opening. So I learned a lot from attending his rehearsals.
And I feel like musicians all wish their teacher would come to the rehearsal and see them in action, because the experience of having the lesson and working on the excerpt or whatever is so different from when you're sitting in the chair and you have to project so much more and everything's so much different. So to have someone really see you in action, but make sure that you stay in power and you get to be the one in charge it's incredible.
It was. It was just not required of him to do it. For him to get to receive the money for the grant that was furnished to him, he could have decided however he wanted to interact with me, and he was still going to get the money. But he's one of those old school guys that say, if I'm your teacher, then this is what I need to do.
So lucky to have a teacher like that. So how did you find your way from having 3 jobs in Los Angeles to being the assistant in Baltimore?
Sure. Just to give a quick little connection from the debut orchestra, after I left there was 1993, and all my jobs just ended then because debut was always just 3 years. Like there was no way to renew it longer than that. That's just the contract and that's over. So I left all 3 jobs and applied to be the music director of the Chicago Youth Symphony in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Which was, the age level was only up to high school. And so I had a number, I just want to tell this quick story because I had a number of my colleagues say, why are you going to just high school level? I mean, you are conducting the Pacific Symphony, which is these great professionals who can read everything down. They're studio musicians. They're phenomenal players. And you were conducting the debut orchestra, which is basically like a professional orchestra. I mean, they play like that. And you had this other high school group. And now you're going to just a high school group, albeit Chicago. It's,
right.
Chicagoland. So you get the very best. So yeah, really great players. But we all know that difference between being a senior in high school and even a freshman in college or a sophomore in college, there's a big difference in the playing level. But you know what? I said, I have to take this calculated risk with my career because I felt like I was getting a bit overwhelmed with all of the scores I had to learn in 3 years. And so I felt like I'm doing kind of B+ or A- work. We all know ourselves what we're capable of. Mm-hmm. We all know I could be doing this better, or I'm doing this about the best I can. I think I was doing the best that I could given the circumstances, but I felt like I was not really getting into the depth of the music that I really needed to. And I felt like I needed more time. And being at the Chicago Youth Symphony was the perfect way to afford myself extra time and to have my own laboratory where I could work slowly and very methodically with an orchestra that was really had extreme potential. And I remember Michael Morgan, who was the assistant conductor of the Chicago Symphony and music director of the Chicago Youth Symphony before me. I asked him about repertoire, and he said, they will be able to play anything that you're able to teach them.
That's
and
cool,
I thought,
too.
Yes, very good. It was very good. A great statement, great adage. And I think of that often. And I thought, okay, that's exactly what I need. Because sometimes as a young conductor and you're conducting professional orchestra like Pacific Symphony, everything is going pretty swimmingly, as long as you have pretty good conducting technique and everything, it kind of, and you don't have a lot of time to actually go back and do things because you have one rehearsal to prepare an entire program.
Yeah.
That means that there are certain details in the score that you're not always attending to. You just don't have the time. Mm-hmm. But I needed to reverse that whole situation where I had lots of time to work in lots of detail. Yeah. And the Chicago Youth Symphony did that for me. So I was there with Chicago Youth Symphony for 4 years total, but I was only in Chicago for 2 years because I decided I needed to get back into professional conducting. At that time, the Kansas City Symphony and the Baltimore Symphony were looking for assistant conductors. And I took both auditions, and I won both auditions. And it was tricky because I took Kansas City audition and won, and they said, will you say yes? And I said, will you wait? Yeah, yeah. I said, can you wait a month until I take the Baltimore audition? And then I can give you an answer. So Kansas City said, no, we can't wait. You have to answer now. So I said, yes, 1 year. And then I took the Baltimore audition, won, and they said, can you start now? And I said, no, I can't. I can't start right now. And I talked to several colleagues, and they said, just back out of your Kansas City contract, because Baltimore is a bigger orchestra. They go on tour to Japan for 3 weeks. They record with David Zinman, and they're just a bigger orchestra. You should just accept that and say no to Kansas City. I said, but I already signed a contract. So I had to really think about this a lot and say, what am I going to do? I told Baltimore that I wasn't comfortable backing out of the Kansas City job, and could they wait for a year? John Gidwitz, who was the executive director of the Baltimore Symphony, said yes. And he respected me for keeping my word with Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that was very valuable, because a lot of people get in that pickle, and it's hard to not pick the bigger prize.
Right. And our music world is very small,
mm-hmm.
and people remember. And there are a lot of musical chairs moving around. So people were here who remember you from there, and then they go over here, and you might work with them again, but they remembered how you reneged on
mm-hmm.
this other thing that you said you were going to do. So I said, it's more valuable for me to keep my word with Kansas City. And so I kept that. I lived there in Kansas City, and I flew out to Baltimore a number of times because they had things for me to do when I wasn't in Kansas City. So I was actually doing both of those jobs the same year: Kansas City Symphony associate and Baltimore Symphony assistant. And I kept my Chicago Youth Symphony. So I was going 3 jobs, but not like 3 jobs that I had in LA, but 3 jobs
in 3 cities.
Yeah, 3 different places. So I got done with the Kansas City job. Then I moved to Baltimore. And I was in Baltimore from 1996 to 2001. And I got there as an assistant. So I had already been assistant kind of for that first year flying in. Kept Chicago Youth because, when you conduct as an assistant conductor with a major professional orchestra, you're not going to get to do Mahler. You're just not. Right. You're going to do movements of symphonies. You're going to do smaller works, which is great because you have podium time with a great orchestra, and that's what you need. But you're also not attending to those big works. Like, how are you going to know how to do Symphonie Fantastique and things like that unless you can do them with an orchestra who can play those? That was my Chicago Youth Symphony. That was my place to keep doing that music. So I was commuting from Baltimore to Chicago then for 1 more year. And then after my 4th year of being with Chicago Youth, I resigned from that position. And I only had Baltimore. But then the Haddonfield Symphony opened up, which is now called Symphony in C.
Yeah.
They're in Haddonfield, New Jersey, just right across the river from Curtis Institute of Music, from Philadelphia. So that had a great orchestra there. And Alan Gilbert was the music director of the Haddonfield Symphony. And he came down to guest conduct Baltimore, and we became fast friends. And he said, I have to go up to Haddonfield to lead a rehearsal tonight. And this is in his week of guest conducting the Baltimore Symphony. He said, you should come up with me and hear the orchestra because I'm going to step down from that job. And maybe you could step into that job. And I thought, maybe. And so I drove him up from Baltimore up to Haddonfield, which is about 2.5-hour drive. And I listened to the rehearsal, and then sure enough, he was stepping down that year. So I threw my hat in the ring, and I got the Haddonfield job. And that was a great replacement for my Chicago Youth Symphony job.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, that Haddonfield job, that was very much like the debut orchestra. They could play, Curtis strings, and I had some winds from Juilliard, and I had some percussion from right there at Temple University. So I had this amazing orchestra in Haddonfield, 5 concerts a year. And so I had Baltimore and that's what I was doing. And that's when I started guest conducting more. But back to your I just wanted to fill in that little gap there of getting to Baltimore. When I started at Baltimore in, 95, 96, but then really in 96, 97, I was still assistant conductor and was conducting probably about 70 concerts a year, because I was the only assistant there. Sometimes at the major orchestras like that, they have 2 assistants and they spell each other off, because not only are you conducting all of the educational concerts and first half of Pop's concerts and some subscription concerts possibly, but you're also you're the cover conductor for all the other concerts for the music director and all the guest conductors for the classical series. So, I was inundated with a lot of work, but conducting a lot of programs. So now we're in the 97, 98 season. I'm with Baltimore now in my 3rd out of 6 seasons. we go to Japan on a 2-week tour. David Zinman is the music director. And this is an important part right here, what I'm going to describe. I went along as the assistant, and we went from town to town, and I was out there listening for balance and giving David Zinman feedback and everything. But the executive director, John Gidwitz, who I'd mentioned earlier, came up to me and said, we almost considered leaving you home because it's an extra person taking him along, and David never gets sick, never. And so, it would have saved us some money and everything, but, we're glad you're here. Anyway, so fast forward to the end of the tour, David Zinman comes down with a bout of kidney stones. He's never been sick. He's never canceled for anything. And he gets kidney stones the night before the last performance.
Oh, my gosh.
And we're all having this party together with all the musicians because it's, before we return back to the States. And I was having a drink and my meal. And John Gidwitz came over and whispered in my ear. He said, "If I were you, I would behave now as though I might be conducting the concert tomorrow night." I see. As I put my drink over to the side and said, "Thank you for that." And then I got a call the next morning from David Zinman about 8:15 a.m. He said, and he spoke in a very perfunctory kind of way. He said, "Daniel, this is David. I have kidney stones. If they pass, I'll be conducting the concert tonight. If they don't pass, you'll be conducting the concert tonight. Do you have any questions?" And I thought, there's no good way to answer this question, because if I say, yes, I have these questions, he'll be like, "How could you have all these questions? What are you, a student conductor? You don't even know what you're doing. Why do you have questions?" Yeah. But if I said, "No, I don't have any questions," he'd be like, "Well, what are you, some know-it-all? You have no, here I am, like a seasoned conductor. I've done these pieces over and over, and you have no questions." So I thought, I have no way out. And I had to think on my feet, I said, "You know what? I have been watching you like a hawk. I've marked everything in my score, and I've been listening intently." I said, I feel like I'm really prepared." And
good for you.
Yeah. And he said, "Okay, well, you'll find out later what's going to happen with me." And about 11 o'clock that morning, 3 hours later, I got the word that David had been shipped back to the United States on painkillers and everything else. So
wow.
I was the one who was going to get on the podium that night. So the question became to me, the question that was posed to me right away by the operations person and artistic administrator was, "Daniel, I'm assuming you want a rehearsal with the orchestra today. We can schedule one from 2 to 4:30, and you can go through everything so that you're ready. You feel ready with the musicians for tonight's performance, the final performance of the tour." And I said, "Yes, of course." I said, "Yes, of course," almost said, "of course." And I said, no, because I thought it through. I thought, this is the last day in Tokyo for all the musicians. They've played this music. We had 2 programs prepared. So it was going back and forth from one program to the other. And I thought, they know this program like the back of their hand. If they get together at 2:00, right in the middle of the day, and have to sit there in rehearsal while I get up and conduct, they're not going to play with a lot of energy. They're going to be like, "Why are we here?" And they're going to be, "Well, we're here because Hege, needs to conduct through the program." And if it wasn't quite together because they're not putting a lot of energy into it, they'll say, "Well, it must be because Hage's conducting. We don't sound as good." And I thought, no, we're not going to have a rehearsal. It'll just, only something bad can happen. So we're going to go on, just no rehearsal. And that means that I couldn't make a single mistake, because the program was Prokofiev Classical Symphony, Debussy La Mer, which I had never conducted before, ever, like even in rehearsal. And then Berlioz Symphonie Fantastique, which I had done with my Chicago Youth Symphony before, but I had done it my way, and I kind of knew what David was going to do, but it was a lot of music. It was a purely orchestral program. And Isaac Stern was on the trip with us, but we weren't doing his program. We weren't doing the one where he played, because the other program was Torquay Bright Blue Music, Bruch G minor violin concerto with Isaac Stern playing, and then Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony. but that was in rotation. That
Right.
was not the program. But Symphonie Fantastique and La Mer and Prokofiev Classical was. So I simply just really hunkered down and just went through those scores over and over and over again. And I think the musicians were a little nervous because here we were in the big profile hall. And before this, when we were waiting if David was going to say yes or no because of his kidney stones, I had musicians coming up saying, don't worry, he's not going to cancel. That guy could be in traction, like in a bed, and could only move his pinkies, after being hit by a Mack truck. And he would still conduct that program because Isaac Stern is not there. And so it would just be him and the orchestra. And so I thought, well, I probably won't do it. But then, of course, I was on the podium that night. And I remember when I walked out to the podium for the Prokofiev Classical, I looked around at the orchestra and they were all looking up.
I bet they were.
They were on the edge of their seat, which is something I think that would not have happened as well had we had a rehearsal that day to go through the whole program.
For sure.
And I think they were so ready for everything. There was an electric feeling in that hall because here I was stepping in front of them to do this pretty challenging program with no rehearsal. For me, rehearsal. I just remember it now like a dream. I can remember very specific things about the concert. And I remember at the end, everyone was congratulating me and saying how I led them so well. But the truth is, and I think everyone has to admit this when they know it's the truth, they carried me too. We worked together. It was something that was just this symbiotic relationship that worked so well because I think the level of concentration that we all needed to have at that time. And it was a very triumphant way to end the tour for me. And that was the thing that moved me from assistant to associate right away. I was on the, kind of on the next level. And I remember the very next thing I had to conduct with the orchestra was, I think it was some Morton Gould piece, of Yankee Doodle Dandy for a Tiny Tots concert. And I remember the orchestra, I said, because when I walked on the podium for my first rehearsal after the tour, they were applauding me and it was so supportive and so nice. And I said, okay, so let's do Yankee Doodle Dandy. And they just all burst out laughing. Because it's like, wow, what a come down from doing that Symphonie Fantastique in Japan and no rehearsal. Yeah, right. La Mer. And now I'm back to doing Yankee Doodle Dandy. But
I love it.
But, they came up and said, how did you become like such a really great conductor in that concert? And I said, I think I'm the same conductor. I think that the music, the situation was so big and you guys were all paying attention and I was, on a different level maybe. But that was a really good situation for me because I moved up, I think, in their eyes a bit. They had a different kind of respect because they said, I just couldn't believe you were so prepared. That's what one of the brass players said. I remember you were just so prepared for that concert. And I was like, yeah, I was. And again, this goes back to something I said earlier about luck tends to favor the prepared because, yeah, you could really screw that up. I mean, but I worked hard. I worked hard for that. Of the two programs that I told you about with the Torquay Bright Blue Music, Bruch Violin Concerto in G minor, and the Tchaik 4, that's just one tuba in that program. The other program, which was Prokofiev Classical, Debussy La Mer, Symphonie Fantastique, requires two tubas at the end. When you get to the fourth, fifth movement, the fifth movement, which is Sabbath, is really where it shines. Well, most orchestras, even the big orchestras, don't have two tubas on their roster. So who was the first call to come in and play? It was the tuba player from the Syracuse Symphony. Ed Deefus, who was also a first call for the Philadelphia Orchestra, played New York Philharmonic, played in Cleveland. I mean, he was playing with all the major orchestras. Fantastic player. He's now in Australia now, but he was the call to come in and play second tuba on the Baltimore Symphony concert. And if Tchaik 4 had been in the rotation, he would have been sitting in his room watching cable or whatever. I mean, he wouldn't have been there at the concert. So he had all of Symphonie Fantastique to sit and watch until he had to come in and play. Now, it turned out that Ed Deefus, the tuba player from Syracuse Symphony, was on the music director search committee for the Syracuse Symphony. I had not even applied for that position of music director of Syracuse Symphony because I thought that's too big of a step for me to go at this point. I need to stay as a second or third conductor at a major orchestra where I can still peer in through the windows and see how it all works and learn, kind of just learn, because you're not in the hot seat yet. When you're music director, that's where you really, a lot of the institution rests on your shoulders a lot more. But when you're the assistant or the associate or the resident conductor, not so much. It's really on the music director. So I thought I need more time incubating. Like I was saying, I wanted to stay at University of Utah next year. I need more time at the Baltimore Symphony as an associate, and then I became resident conductor before I applied to a music director position, the level of Syracuse, because that was a full-time 40-week orchestra at the time. So, but when Ed Deefus saw me and he was on the committee, he must have gone back to the committee and said, we should take a look at this guy. And so I got contacted by the Syracuse Symphony after I got back from the Baltimore tour, and they said, so we've been asked to get your resume if you're interested in this job. And I thought, well, I am. I was thinking to myself, I am interested, but this is a bigger step that I'm really wanting to take in my career at this point. But I thought, why not? That old thing, you should say yes. Mm-hmm. So I sent in my materials, and I was one of 7 candidates for one season of guest conductors who were up for the position. And the music critic from the Syracuse area wrote in the Syracuse newspaper that I was the dark horse because I had the worst program. I mean, on the season, they had stuff like, Pictures and Exhibition, Prokofiev Fifth, Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony, just barn burner pieces, Shostakovich Fifth. I mean, it was like everything was like these huge, built-in standing ovations, no matter who does it, because the piece is just so overwhelming. My program was Torquay, Javelin, Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, and Schumann's Second Symphony, which I think is a great program. Yep. But Schumann's Second is more like at the end, you're like, oh, delightful. I'm so delighted to hear this piece, but it isn't leap out of your seat like excitement. And I didn't mind. Actually, I didn't feel. See, what we did was we didn't choose the programs. We chose when we were available. We said, I'm available for this concert. Like, we were just given dates, and then it was just like dealing cards. You just got whatever program fit into that slot. And I had the February slot, and that's where Schumann Second was. And the great thing was that at Haddonfield, I said, you know what? We're changing the program. We're doing Schumann Second this fall or whatever. I was able to throw that in because I never conducted it before. And so I programmed it, ran through it, rehearsed it with my orchestra in Haddonfield. Then I felt more ready to go up to Syracuse and get to conduct it. It went very well. And I was asked if I wanted that job. This was back in 99. And I said yes, and I moved to Syracuse then in 2000. So that was another case of just certain things lined up. Really wonderful how some of those things line up for you.
I think that's one of the most beautiful things about music, really, is that there is such a component of the network in all the different iterations of what that word really means. But you were prepared, so you got this experience, and then in that experience you were excelling, and that brought this other person into your life, and then that brings another, and so each section of your life is a mixture of talent, work, luck, and community, and the whole thing just kind of rotates that way, and it's incredible. But I think music is very unique in that.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Sometimes, we think we're going to be nervous for something, and the event is so big that it almost calms us down again. Like you can only keep getting revved up to a certain point. And then when it's like way up here, like Mount Everest, suddenly you go, you know what? It is what it is. You just, like, there's no way I can match how important that is. So you just simply let it be. And I think people find that too when they're in very stressful situations. They think, oh, how will I cope with that? And then the stress is so great that you kind of go, you know what? It's just too much. And so
Yeah.
it almost makes you back away a little bit and let it happen. I don't
Yeah,
know. I
that's
don't know what it
great.
was.
Yeah, it's a great lesson though, because obviously we all hold these different levels of experiences in our life to, this incredible amount of stress and hope. And it's kind of great to know that you can just let go because it's not helping you to do that.
Right.
Just stay
Exactly.
focused on what you're supposed to be doing.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this. This has been so fun.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you for joining us on Inside the Notes. Be sure to visit InsideTheNotes.com for additional content from our artists and guests, and click subscribe to stay up to date on future interviews. Until next time, this is your host, Erica Block.